Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. And I've got a fantastic guest for you today, Carlos Alvarenga, and he is doing his PhD at the University of Maryland. He is a writer, thinker, author, communications research. He wrote his book about persuasion, which he's going to talk about. And it's going to be a fascinating discussion about writing and writing your first book. And I'm really happy to welcome Carlos to the show. Welcome, Carlo.
We're great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, yeah. Briefly, because we're going to dive into it. Talk about your just brief background, what you do, and we'll dive right into it.
Yeah, so a long career in 1 minute, something like this. Started as a journalist in Latin America, which is where I'm from. I'm from El Salvador. Came to the US to ghostwrite a book for a consulting. When the project was finished, she said, "How would you like a job?" I took it as a temporary gig, ended up staying 20 plus years, became a partner at Accenture and EY, left consulting. I always wanted to go back to writing. This is my first love. And a few years ago, I left, sat down, wrote two books, the first of which came out last fall, which is a book on persuasion, which then got me invited to do a PhD in language, which is what I'm doing right now. So I'm actually working now on the research for the follow-up book to the persuasion book, which will be my dissertation. So it's kind of killing two birds with one stone, as the saying goes. So yes, right now it's a reader and writer and researcher. Mhm.
Yeah. So one thing is persuasion, and a really great book that I read was by Robert Cialdini. He talked about the kind of the principles, how like marketers get you to buy things, and you can use it in sales and but talk about you talk about persuasion is not a soft skill, but it's an art. And what do you mean? What do you mean?
Yeah, I know Cialdini's book, and it's one reason I wrote my book is that I thought it was a persuasion, but it really isn't, right? His book is about psychology, and it's about manipulation. If I ask for a favor, then you feel obliged. To me, that's not persuasion. When I trick you or manipulate you or use some kind of psychological phenomenon to get you to do something, that's sort of manipulation, in my opinion. Persuasion is no tricks, no gifts, nothing. I get you to willingly believe what I believe. I get you to willingly believe what I want you to believe, right? To hold as true what I want you to hold as true. And so people sometimes think this is a soft skill or something you're born with or it's undefined. And what I argue in the book that it's not. You should think of it as chemistry. It's chemistry with words, and it is predictable. It has rules. It operates in very specific ways. And you can actually look at a message and decipher the formula of the message, which I do in the book, for any message ever sent, in my opinion, person to person, person to gods, gods to gods, gods to persons, right? They work across time, culture, space, era, and they were first articulated by a philosopher named Aristotle. And all I do in my book is take what he wrote and expand it, explain it, and then illustrate it through examples drawn from modern society and culture.
Yeah, really interesting. And the more I study persuasion, the more I can tell who's like being manipulative. You can also, when you talk to people, communicate with people, you can kind of get a sense, are they, manipulative or, passive aggressive, these types of character traits. The next question is, with now with media, because like for example, I haven't watched TV in like over 20 years, and all my media consumption is on a smartphone or social media. So how is persuasion different between the traditional media and social media?
So there's a chapter in my book on persuasion and technology. And I look at video because video has a special kind of role in persuasion, which is ending. But videos had a purpose, right? When we watch video, we believe it. But now with deepfakes and AI, the age where if you see it on video, you believe it is coming to a close because you can make anything into video today. So, but on social media, the way it works simply is that all platforms have a kind of dominant logic, right?
Yeah.
Persuasion logic. So, for example, on Twitter/X, the dominant logic is debate, it's argument. Right. So how do you move up the rank? You pick a fight with somebody famous, or somewhat famous. Hopefully they respond. That gives you the right to fight with somebody even more famous. So as you pick fights, you move up the algorithm, right? And you get more and more followers, and you're shown to more and more people. In other platforms like Instagram, it tends to be more emotion because Instagram doesn't allow for long messages or logic. So what do you have? Images for the most part, right? And so
Uh-huh.
images tend to work well for sentiment, which is really what it is. It isn't even really emotion, it's sentimentality. YouTube is about character, right? What happens is somebody builds a persona. I know this from watching my son, who loves a YouTube channel called Lionsgate, which are two Italian guys who make videos, shorts about food. So he
Uh-huh.
just likes them. They're funny, they're charming, they're interesting. And so it doesn't matter if one video or another isn't that great. You sort of like the host, right? The creator, quote unquote. They're relatively simple platforms structurally, right? One
Uh-huh.
persuades by character, one persuades by argument, one persuades by feeling, which is what Aristotle says. These are the only ways you can persuade anybody or anything. It's just these three things, and you watch it exactly play out on social media today. You know, he would not be surprised by what happens online today, right? Because you can't today you can scale up a persuasive message into the millions in a matter of hours, and that just wasn't possible. So the mechanics are the same. It's just the scale at which you can operate as a persuader is much higher than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, in an additional question, follow up on that question is because when you talk about scale, and then especially because now we have Metcalfe's, we have Moore's, Metcalfe's, and Grisham's law, which are all kind of talking about networks, network effects. But now
Mhm.
with AI, you can scale quantity even more. So how is that going to change? You know, we'll talk about how AI can be used in writing a book, but talk about how AI is the plus and minus of using that in social media.
Well, it's an interesting question
Yeah.
because somebody asked me, what if AI, ChatGPT reads your book? So I won't get any royalties for that. But besides the fact that I won't get paid by ChatGPT, which is not a good thing, but it would learn what took me 3 years to explain, right? And so you go, okay, those rules go into work. The chemistry goes into the machine gets smarter about persuasion, and we'll see. It's an interesting question when it comes to machines. And somebody asked if I was lecturing at a journalism school, and they asked me, um, will machines persuade differently than people? And I said, I'm not sure. I don't think so. But the
Uh-huh.
jury is still out. It's a question to be decided. Will machine persuasion be different, right? For example, when your car says, hey, it's time to first service, and then remind you you're late for you're supposed to take me to the shop, right? Is it trying to persuade you? And if so, that's a very human way of doing it, right? It's giving you guilt trip, basically. You're late. Go get me fixed. Maybe there'll be some other way which machines will invent once they get a
Uh-huh.
little bit smarter. But there was a
Yeah.
project by IBM. If you remember Watson, the
Uh-huh.
famous Watson project, there was a concurrent project called Project Debater, and it was a similar project to try to get a machine to beat a human in a debate. Watson worked, Debater didn't. Debater was considered a failure. And the project
Uh,
manager, there's a nice video of the project manager interview online, and he says, it's much harder. It's easier to be a person in Go than it is to beat them in a debate, right? So now that remains a kind of human trait, but that doesn't mean that it won't change. In fact, if you think about 2001, that movie, right, Space Odyssey,
yeah.
there's a scene where the machine Hal locks the astronaut outside the spaceship, and he explains to him, "I had to do this." And he's trying to persuade the astronaut that it
Yeah.
was the right thing, right? The mission was
Yeah.
important. You were the mission in jeopardy. But that's one of the science fiction examples of a machine trying to persuade a human that I have to kill you for the good of the project. So we'll see if the reality manifests itself that way down the road. It's still early days, I suppose.
Yeah. I lost my train of thought, but we'll continue on with the
Sure.
conversation because this oh so because talking well one thing is what uniques do modern social media platforms present especially with AI and do you ever see journalism being obsolete because now we have AI and now we have basically we have micro macro influencers and so these are kind of like people that are going to have these people are going to be like CNN or Fox News, you're gonna have like millions, and then you have like micro kind of on the long tail people that have their followers. What do you think about that?
I hope not, right? Because traditionally journalists play. I started as a journalist, right? So you play a function. Your job is to investigate things, right? The world in real time, right? That was so. In other words, you're not a historian. Historian will that says, okay, this will happen 20, 30 years ago or 500 years ago. journalist tells you this is what happened yesterday, right? So it's like something's the first draft of history. So the function of what is happening around you right now, could that be done by a machine? Possibly. I don't see why not conceptually, right? But the function of a journalist, which is to inform you about what is happening in the world, theoretically in an unbiased way. Now, that's the key word, right? Unbiased. I think that
Uh-huh.
function is necessary. Imagine if you lived and you had no idea what happened on October 7th in Israel. You just didn't know, right? Or you didn't know who was leading in the polls. You didn't know or what laws were being passed because you didn't hear that. So I think that the problem is not journalism is doesn't work. It's just that we've got an economy that takes the work of a few journalists and just repurposes it, right? Look, if you ever go look at a trail of an article that you see
Uh-huh.
online, oftentimes you'll find that it's a rewrite of another article, which was a rewrite of another article, which was a rewrite of something that somebody had done like 4 articles ago. So today you have this original piece of writing, which is then recycled and rewritten. And with AI, even worse because it does it faster, right?
Uh-huh.
So it's funny how we think there's an explosion of content, but the original content is actually gotten smaller. It's just that it's repurposing it, right?
Uh-huh.
Much
Uh-huh.
more than it could before because it's so hard to track everything now online. In the old days,
Uh-huh.
if you printed a story in a paper, for you to reprint it took as much trouble as to actually almost print the first one. Today, I can absorb this story, recycle it on ChatGPT, and I have what looks like a new reporting, but it really isn't, right? If you look carefully, you can reconstruct where the thing kind of came from. So yeah, but I,
Yeah.
I do believe democracies require journalism to function. I think it's a critical
Uh-huh.
role, and hopefully and I've seen startups that are working on trying to reinvent it for the modern age. So we'll
Uh-huh.
see if they make it work. I think it's important. Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. Which brings us to two things. One is talking about persuasion in the upcoming election, and it's going to be a huge election year with like huge implications. And
Right.
people don't realize the implications of who becomes president, especially in these days. And so then now people are worried about AI and like Twitter is going to basically like the algorithms are designed basically to conform to your likes and your reposts, so you'll see more of those. So, how is that all playing out, in the media? And a lot of people say like the media is rigged, corporations, they bought out the media, the government bought it, all this. How do we find the truth?
Well, this is the problem. The only way to find out is to understand the source that you're looking at. For example, people will sometimes send me an article and I'll say, yeah, but who wrote it? Where was it published? And then when they never stop to look at the source. And when you do a little bit digging, you find out, oh, this source is controlled by this political that pays money. It isn't really reporting, it's just propaganda. And
Yeah,
so the trouble becomes when there were only 3 channels, right, on the network back in the 60s, you could say NBC, CBS, whatever it was, right? And I know who these sources are. They were manipulated as well, without a doubt.
yeah,
But it was easier to filter through what was manipulation and what wasn't. Today, when you have thousands of outlets all claiming to be authoritative on a given topic, saying, all right, what is this channel? And should I believe it or not? Is hard. That's why I think the best thing to do today is to find 3 or 4 outlets, preferably with different opinions, right? Who contract a Wall Street Journal and New York Times, for example, they don't agree on lots of things. So if you get one view and the other view, and you can process both and synthesize what they're saying, so it's almost like being a jury in a trial. I remember talking to a lawyer with him who told me the prosecution will stretch one way, the defense will stretch the other way. The jury's job is to figure out where is the truth, right? And it's probably not exactly what either side says. And I think this is the same thing about being a consumer of news today. We're a jury, right? It's a prosecutor on the left, a prosecutor on the right. Our job is to vote which one is probably right. And we do this constantly when we weigh what people tell us. So yeah, to be a consumer of news is like being a jurist today. You don't expect this side to tell the whole truth, maybe, or at least you expect each side to kind of spin it one way or the other. But we
uh,
should be able to judge which one we think is right. If somebody says this is a terrible thing, well, why don't you investigate what it is and decide, okay, now I know that when they say terrible thing, it really is terrible. But when they call something terrible, they're probably pushing it a little bit. That's at least
Yeah.
that's how I approach it, right? I don't expect any outlet to be 100% right. What I do is to say, when I consume two or three outlets and compare and contrast, I usually get a good sense of who's telling the truth. That's my
Hmm.
experience.
Hmm.
It's
And
tougher. Right? It's much tougher. It requires way more work
yeah.
to consume news than it did, you know, back in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember like in 2000, I could go to like Wall Street Journal, and then all of a sudden I had to like go through like, I had to go like CNN, NBC, Fox News, and just everything. After,
Yeah,
after Facebook, it was just, I don't even, I go to YouTube, or, I kind of formulate my own, but, which brings a lot of people are now on online communities, and that's where they go for their sources of information. And so, you have like things like 4chan and Wall Street Bets, and like QAnon. So how do
yeah.
you where does persuasion play? Because that's really dangerous. People storming the Capitol, killing people. All these disinformation, misinformation.
Yeah,
What do you do?
I think that it's to become educated. In my book, I explained that I say that persuasion is like chemistry. Well, chemistry is amoral, right? Because I can use chemistry to save your life. I can use chemistry to end your life. I can give you medicine, I can give you poison. And they're both can be very effective. And the same thing happens with persuasion. I think in many places, the chemistry of persuasion is being used for corrupt purposes and to
Mhm.
lie, to convince people of things that are not true. And these very specialized channels, often what they do is they do just that. They corrupt people by using the chemistry in evil ways, right? So they get you to believe things that are not true. And this is a very big problem. I wrote that chapter in my book, I said, because I believe people are trying to poison us. I think that there are people out there who would like to see Americans become completely unable to process the truth, right? They would
Yeah.
like to get this country to be sheep. They would like to get people who are unable to distinguish the reality from a message which is being sent to them. And this has
Yeah.
happened other places and other times, and usually with terrible results. So I think it is dangerous ground for this country that we have fostered these sort of, like you said, they're like persuasion chambers, right? Or I call them persuasion factories. And these persuasion factories use the chemistry for often for terrible reasons, right? To convince people
Mhm.
that what happened in January 6th was a patriotic act, which it totally
Mhm.
wasn't, right? It was an insurrection. But now I use the chemistry of getting you to confuse you, showing you different things, iconography, visuals. And after 6 months of hearing it over and over again, you go, "Hey, those guys, they were pretty good people who did that day, right?" And the chemistry has worked, and I've seen it work, and we see it, right, work all the time, where skillful people, it's like the bad, the bad guys in the James Bond movie. They're not dumb.
Yeah.
They have rockets and spaceships and submarines, and they're just bad. But that doesn't mean they're dumb. So I think the same thing happens in a lot of these places. You have people who are very smart who just have terrible goals.
Sounds like something that like Hitler used to come to power in the 40s, and almost exterminate a whole race, which is very it's very concerning, especially.
That's what I write about. I write about the language of the Third Reich, and I pick 9 different examples of how language is used, and I say I pick these 9 because they're all present in America today, right? And that's a scary thought because you're right. What the Germans did was done by Germany. It wasn't done by a
Yeah.
few Germans, right? And you couldn't force Germany to do it. You had to persuade them, right? You had to
Yeah.
convince the German people to do something horrendous, and they did. Right?
Hmm.
They were persuaded to do this, that this was the right thing. So if anybody who thinks it can't happen again is mistaken. It can happen again. And
Yeah.
so you're right. So this is why I think of learning how this stuff works as a kind of inoculation, right?
Yeah.
Once you see it, understand it, then it's a little less effective, right? Because you go, okay, I know what you're doing. You're doing this, and I can see how you're doing it. Now you're
Uh,
not, it's a little harder to trick you, right?
yeah.
It's like magic,
Yeah.
right? If I show you magic and you don't know how it works, you think, wow, that's really powerful. Then I go, oh no, you know what I did? I misdirected you. I put this here. Next time you see the trick, it's not as impressive, right? And I think the same thing happens here. But hopefully, if somebody reads the book and they go, okay, now I see what you're doing, I get it, right? It's not that
Yeah.
impressive, which is the goal.
Yeah, there was a great documentary at South by Southwest this year talking about, kind of the whole misinformation and AI and they said, the people that control the information and then the people that control the money supply can control everything. And that's, what the elite are doing. It's kind of like they're trying to control what messages you get and really fascinating. How can people check out your work? I know you have a book and you're working on a second book and check out your work and so on.
Looking me up online, it's carlosalvarenga.com. It's my name. And that has
Yeah.
links to everything that I do. You can also look for me on Amazon. The book is available on, it's on print, it's on audiobooks, it's Kindle. I did the narration for the audiobook, which was a nightmare. I'll never do that again. So yeah, it's available in all formats, all over the world. So hopefully it's easy to find. If you just Google my name and persuasion, hopefully, and I think
Yeah.
I am, that's the first thing that will pop up, right?
Well, excellent. And I really enjoyed this conversation and just talking about, persuasion and AI and the dangers of it and what to be aware of. And really insightful conversation. And thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me on, Christopher. My best to you and to your audience. Have a great day.